Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
If I asked you to reflect on what do you think is the biggest and the longest enduring international news story of the last decade, and a story that still endures and continues or remains live, which one will you name? Don't tell me it's the coronavirus pandemic, because that only started this year. I'm talking about the past decade. The chances are, and if I said to you that this is the rise and then the terrible activities of Islamic State or ISIS, I don't think many of you will disagree with me. That's been the biggest international story of the past decade. That's put Al Qaeda into shade. That's put many other kinds of terrorism in the shade. And when it comes to pan Islamic terror organization, ISIS is now like the umbrella organization. So it's a bit like anything happens anywhere. Say in Sri Lanka, uh, those fellows claimed they were ISIS. So any freelancers can rise anywhere, get indoctrinated on internet and learn the tricks on internet. So ISIS now has become the most visible and the most prominent international terror threat, also political threat in the Middle East and Islamic nations, in many of which it has caused a great deal of destabilization. It's also a big story in the West, and we talk today not so much about ISIS but about journalism, because ISIS has also, as Al Qaeda before that, but any set of bad guys that comes in is worse than the previous guys. And I'll go into that in a little bit. So, covering ISIS has been a big challenge. So, those who've got ISIS right, or those who've been trusted with their ISIS coverage, have become global stars. And one of them is somebody that I'm sure many of you know and you've read about and you follow her on her Twitter handle and her coverage and her podcasts. That is Rukmini Callimachi at the New York Times. Over the past about 7-8 years, she joined the New York Times in 2014, but even before that, she did brilliant work for Associated Press in West Africa. That's where Al Qaeda was then quite strong. And she got a lot of stuff out on Al Qaeda. That's how the New York Times hired her. So you've been following her work, and you might also know that she's recently hit a big trough of controversy. So, what is the controversy? The controversy is that in 2018, the New York Times published a series of podcasts. You can find them. I'll give you a link also. Those podcasts are called Caliphate. Now, Caliphate is like the pan-Islamic entity that the Islamic State's ideology believes in setting up, that is combining all the Muslim countries in the world. For a while, they controlled quite a bit of territory between Syria and Iraq. They even controlled the powerful big city of Mosul. Their footprint has now shrunk. They've been driven out of most of their territories they controlled, but they are now still powerful, and they've become very amorphous, as these organizations often do. They have now fractionated. So there is no one headquarter, no one this, no one that. Anybody can take a banner or put some stuff on his chest and say, I am ISIS. We saw some of the ISIS language also used by the suicide bomber in the Pulwama case. If you see the video recording he made before the bombing and the stuff that he has written on him and around him, etc., you can see that this reflects the ISIS thinking. So, ISIS is now an ideology, sort of. It's amorphous, it's also formless. So, it has now become a persistent story. Now, Rukmini Callimachi is somebody who had got her teeth into this story very, very early. Now, knowing the language, knowing the region, all those are advantages. But there is nothing to deny her pluck and also her resourcefulness, because she was traveling, she was reading stuff, she was spending, I've been following her work for a long time with admiration. And sometimes sort of vicariously drawing the satisfaction that a reporter is doing it. Of course, I am no longer young enough to do those things, and also I've had my opportunities in my times, but this is an opportunity that I wish I was 25, 30 years younger and had the resources of the New York Times. So that is how many of us have been watching her work. Now, she was also spending a lot of time and in fact applying a lot of diligence reading up all the stuff that these organizations put out on various media platforms. So as Facebook is blocked, Twitter is blocked, something else is blocked, they go to Telegram, Telegram gets caught, they go to Signal, then they go to something else, they go to something else. So in fact, anytime there was a terror incident where there was possibility of ISIS or Al-Qaeda being involved, the first thing you did instinctively was to check out Rukmani Kalimashi's Twitter handle. And she would put out something, she was usually the first to pick up something coming out of the ISIS platforms, etc., or Al-Qaeda platforms, etc., and globally trusted for that. So she built this great reputation, and then she produced this podcast, the multimedia podcast, which was promoted with her picture on the promotional kind of brochure or the lead picture. Now, she rose as an international star. And you know what happens? When you rise as a star anywhere, a lot of people, particularly those who get left behind, start sharpening their knives. And I can tell you something. There is no place more perilous for a successful professional than a newsroom, because reporters have to compete all the time in a cutthroat manner. And we are worse than vultures at most times. The vultures usually only eat up what somebody else killed or what died by itself naturally, and vultures actually perform a useful job by cleaning it up, by scavenging it for you. But we are different kinds of vultures. We are always waiting. I'm not saying all of us, there are exceptions. We are always waiting for some reporter, particularly a star reporter, to get something wrong, even a little thing wrong. Then if the person is down, then you go after the person and kill the person, and then you clean up the person, pick the person's flesh off his or her bones. So a newsroom is a very tough place. So what's happened now is that one of the characters she interviewed in those podcasts gave his name as Abu Huzaifa al-Kanadi. Now, Abu Huzaifa, as you know, that people who fight for ISIS, etc., before that Al-Qaeda, they tend to give themselves nom de guerres, the special names as fighters or as warriors. Now, these are all based on figures from Islamic history, Islamic tradition. So, Abu Huzaifa al-Kanadi, he spoke to her on the record, and he described how he had joined ISIS, driven by his ideology, and also, most strikingly, how he carried out executions on his own. So he talked about 2 executions in detail of hostages, and you've seen those pictures because ISIS wanted to shock us and ISIS wanted to scare us. So ISIS in fact released films, videos, pictures of these executions and beheadings that they carried out. So he talked in graphic detail about how he carried out these executions while warm blood was flowing, etc., etc. It was quite sobering. Now that became a kind of engine that drove those podcasts and gave them weight also, because here was somebody himself talking about this, having done it. Then what happened? Just the other day, Canadian Police, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police as it's called, RCMP, they arrested this man, Abu Huzaifa. And what did they arrest him for? They arrested him for lying. Lying about what? That I killed people when he had not killed people. Now, first of all, what kind of a nutcase do you have to be if you are boasting about having executed people illegally or having murdered people in cold blood when you haven't actually done it? And he was arrested, irony of ironies, he was arrested in the Canadian hoax law. I mean, I didn't even know that civilized countries are so advanced now that they have hoax laws. Can you imagine if we had a hoax law in this country? I think a lot of people will be in jail. So the Canadians arrested him under their hoax law, saying that he is effectively bullshitting. He is lying. He has done no such thing. Who is Abu Huzaifa? Abu Huzaifa, actually, Abu Huzaifa is a nom de guerre, as I told you. His original name is Shehroz Chaudhry. And where is he from? Usual suspect. He's a Pakistani. I said usual suspect because immigrant in Canada. His father runs a shawarma shop somewhere in Canada. So he made up this story. Now, possibility is that he was with ISIS. He was in Syria, because when the New York Times did that story, they did run some checks, and I will come to those. But once it came out that he was lying, then it sort of knocked the bottom out of the larger story. That if your one key source turns out to be fake in a large story, a key source is the foundation of a story. Deep Throat was the foundation of the Watergate investigation done by Bernstein and Woodward. If Deep Throat, who it turned out to he was identified much later, if he had turned out to be fake, then that whole investigation would go. In this case, the deep throat of the story, in a way, turned out to be fake, or so the Canadian police say. It is not a done deal yet. As that happened, then all these vultures that were waiting, I'm not saying they are good people, bad people, they may be good people, but when I say we vultures, reporters, we are like that. If one among us is very successful, we are waiting for the so and so to make one error. फिर बेटा हम तेरे को देखेंगे. So a bit of that happened, and many people then rose within the New York Times newsroom and other media organizations. So Washington Post, Slate, the Daily Beast, they all carried articles criticizing this coverage and raising questions about this coverage. Now, what happened? This is how a very vibrant media functions. So the New York Times assigned its own media correspondent, Ben Smith, to investigate this story and write about this story. Now, Ben Smith is somebody we've spoken about in the past also. We also spoke about him on the stories he had done similarly when the New York Times' op-ed page editor and his deputy had left because they faced a pushback by the woke crowd in the New York Times, who did not see them as woke enough and who saw them as bringing in articles from people on the right that they did not approve of. So Ben Smith, who is quite a character, in fact he is a media correspondent, he's been described as all kinds of things. In fact, my young colleague Simran Sarure sent me a profile on Ben Smith that describes him as a messy bitch. Ben Smith, male not female, a messy bitch, but bitching is sort of unisex. A messy bitch who lives for the drama, a scoop hound and a famous journo hunter. So he's somebody who's a hitman for famous bylines because he's trying to find out what's wrong with them. So the New York Times assigned him to investigate this story, and in this he has interviewed top New York Times editors. In fact, he says, I was interviewing Dean Backwit, the executive editor, who's my boss's boss, and Joe Kahn, another editor who he says is my boss's boss. So even they are quoted. In some places they say we can't be quoted or we are talking anonymously. So this is like a classical investigation that New York Times has allowed its own media reporter to do. It's quite a story. Please read it. I will give you a link for sure. Now, this story begins with this with a man called Derek Henry Flood, not Ford. Derek Henry Flood. Now, Derek Henry Flood is a young man in Syria who is a kind of a journalist. Now, what happens in all these war zones is that you have a lot of these very enterprising young people. In fact, if you see Vice, etc., you will find the work of a lot of these people coming out of here. So, this gentleman used to work freelance for foreign correspondents, particularly international correspondents who had the resources at about $250 a day. When we have covered wars, we haven't paid anybody $250 a day because that was like our entire per diem those days from RBI. But we have also hired local journalists. We've paid them on a per day basis, both for facilitation and also for the language issues. So we did that in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, traveling in Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, etc., etc. So that's a normal thing. But in these war zones, a lot of the big shot correspondents who might be in Washington, New York, London, wherever, they employ these stringers on a daily basis, daily wage basis, to check things for them, check facts, or get them details. So Derek Henry Flood called Rukmini Kalemashi, who was by that time already a global star. Remember, in 2014, she left AP, and she was hired by the New York Times. And why was she hired by the New York Times? Because she unearthed big Al Qaeda documents in Mali, in Western Africa. She was the Western Africa bureau chief for Associated Press. After that, the New York Times took her on board, and in fact, when she was taken on board, she quickly became a celebrity, and Wired magazine described her as arguably the best reporter on the most important beat in the world in 2018. So she was rising in her celebrity, and as she did that, the New York Times thought, because New York Times was becoming smarter, multimedia, and going into narrative journalism, which is now the way traditional journalism, particularly print, is growing, because TV, etc., give you aankhon dekha hal, but you do a different kind of narrative journalism with drama, depth, etc., etc., etc. So she rose like a star in that firmament. And I know at some point you will ask me, why Rukmini? Now, Rukmini is a Romanian American. She was a Romanian refugee. She left communist Romania, Ceausescu's communist Romania, as a child. Her parents migrated or escaped. Her parents were friends with Rukmini Devi Arundale. No part of her genetics is Indian, but part of her mind, you can say, is Indian, because her parents were friends with Rukmini Devi Arundale, the founder of Kalakshetra in Chennai, and so she was named Rukmini. In fact, later she studied Sanskrit at Oxford University, and as part of that, those studies, she just happened to be in India when the Gujarat earthquake took place, and she covered that as well. That aside, Rukmini now was in the crosshairs of everybody else, people who were envious, people who were angry. These are a lot of intellectuals in the Middle East, lots of Muslim intellectuals, lots of people on the liberal left who thought she was unnecessarily demonizing the Middle East and Islamic culture, etc. So Ben Smith tells you that this guy, Derek Henry Flood, he called her just after her podcast Caliphate had begun to get published, and he called her to congratulate her. But she immediately told him that, look, this is fine, but are you in this city? Where are you calling from? He said, I'm in a city called Manbij in Syria. She said, if you're in a city called Manbij, then can you check for me what they know about a man called Abu Huzaifa, a former ISIS terrorist or fighter, whatever you want to call him. I'd say terrorist, if he was a man for real. Can you find out more about him, and can you confirm to me that they know about him? So Derek Henry Flood then says that he went around town on his motorbike. In fact, there's a picture of him in the article, asking people. He didn't find any details. Nobody seemed to know. And also by that time, ISIS had lost control of that area. In fact, finally a goldsmith told him, "Beta, tum zyada sawal pooch rahe ho. You are asking too many questions. You will be bumped off or kidnapped." So he then left that place and escaped to safety, because too many of these stringers or part-timers have been kidnapped, killed, or held to ransom. So that story ended there. But what Ben Smith is trying to tell us is that in 2018, even while the podcasts were on, there was concern as to who he was, and she was trying to check. Now he says that doubts had arisen then itself, because a lot of the other hostages who had come out, they said never heard of this man, and also a lot of the ISIS people who had surrendered said they didn't know this man. So doubts are rising, and also, as I told you, all newsrooms are full of politics because they are full of competition. Competition is good. Politics is a side effect of that, or a collateral damage of that. It's part of our lives as reporters. Now, there were protests also from many New York Times correspondents. For example, Margaret Coker, who was New York Times' Iraq bureau chief, she quit after a bitter fight with her. And when this latest Royal Canadian Mounted Police stuff came out, she actually tweeted saying that the series Caliphate should now be called #hoax. So that is what tells you how much scrutiny her work was under. Now the Times has set up a group of top editors, which is Dean Murphy, who is investigating reporting chief there, and Mark Mazzetti. Now Mark Mazzetti is somebody who I know, whose book I have read, The Way of the Knife, on how CIA from an intelligence organization became a killing machine fighting Al Qaeda. It's a marvelous book. You should see it. In fact, you can see the jacket. So they are now investigating what exactly happened. But it is true that the New York Times got suspicious even then and tried to confirm it. But then Eric Schmidt, a New York Times correspondent in Washington, said that 2 sources in the US government had confirmed to him that such a man did exist. But that was not good enough, because that was also anonymous, source based. So there is a quote that Ben Smith uses from C.J. Chivers, who is a noted war correspondent, who says that, look, I've been warning about this, and in fact he wrote in the past that the kind of stuff Rukmini is bringing to the NYT, once the facts come out on this will burn the place down. And then other doubts came up that maybe there was an effort or there was a weakness whereby the reporter was coming with a preset idea of a story and then finding facts to fit that picture to get that story. And because you had made a commitment to your office, in your pre-travel memos you had promised them a certain kind of story. If you were not going to get that story, you were going to be questioned. So the pressure then was to somehow produce that story. Now that is something that another former New York Times correspondent, Kendra Pierre-Louis, you will see her tweet, she said so also, that sometimes the memos to justify our travel or get travel sanction had to be so detailed as if they wrote the whole story. And if what you brought in did not fit that description, you were in deep trouble. So there was that pitfall. So there is a quote there from these writings that I pick up that says, reporters looking for a terrifying yarn will find terrorist sources eager to help terrify. Now that's my experience as well, because terrorists use terror as their main weapon, that's right. But the notion of terror, they might kill 10 people, but they want to terrorize 100 million others with that. That only happens if they can exaggerate their achievements through the media and terrify further. And also another explanation that again I see in Ben Smith's article, that reporters also know that if somebody is boasting on the part of ISIS about having committed more crimes, I killed 10 people, it's unlikely that the ISIS press office will call back to protest के बॉस आपका फैक्ट गलत है, हमने 10 नहीं, हमने 5 मारे थे, या हमने 2 मारे थे, हमने मारे नहीं. ISIS press office will say हमने 200 मारे थे, because the more you say they killed, the more value they get as a consequence. Now this led to a lot of controversy. A lot of people said that, look, you are now pathologizing Islamic way of life, Islam as a religion. You are pathologizing the Middle East. Rafia Zakaria, who is a very well-known columnist, she wrote a column questioning a lot of her coverage. And then another story came up involving a man called Abu al-Jud. Now, Abu al-Jud's story was published on December 28, 2014. Must have been just after Rukmini joined the New York Times, because she joined in 2014. And that story said that Abu al-Jud had seen in a prison camp, he was also in a prison camp, ISIS prison camp, he had seen some American hostages there and he exchanged glances with them, and he tried to alert American authorities, but they did not move to help free those hostages. Now that became a lead story in the New York Times. You will see a facsimile of that. Now that story was questioned immediately thereafter, because many questions arose on whether such a man was in a prison or not, or whether he had seen anybody or not. Later he gave some interviews saying, I saw 1 person, not 3. But then there were doubts whether he had seen anybody. The New York Times then got worried, again because internal politics, people say, iska check karao, galat keh rahi hai. How can she get all the big stories? They sent a reporter called Tim Arango then to southern Turkey to check out. And he checked out, his checks were not inconclusive. Rukmini kept on growing between 2014 and now she's got 4 Pulitzer nominations besides winning many prizes. What has now happened is that a lot of critics have now come out. A lot of critics within the New York Times and around. A lot of the critics on the Middle Eastern beat. Obviously, who thought they were beaten by her coverage in the past. Now what happens is that when somebody finds one chink in your armor, they try to open it and then demolish the entire edifice. So that is what's going on. If you ask me, I think this scrutiny is healthy. I think it tells you the strength of a democratic system and the strength of a very vibrant media in a democratic system. But if you ask me instinctively, I think having followed Rukmini Callimachi's work all this while, I do not think that she will fake a story. I don't believe that she will fake a story. Because we must remember that whatever the final verdict on Rukmini, and I hope that it's positive because I believe in her work and I believe in her, whatever the final verdict, this will not make ISIS any less worse than they are. This is not make them any less of cold-blooded, religiously driven, cutthroat thugs than they are. None of that will change. But yes, if the concern is that that is leading to generalization, that is leading to stereotyping of an entire community, an entire ethnicity and an entire faith, then I think this kind of balance is welcome.